I used to think that being dependable was enough. Show up for work, check in at home, keep the promises other people let slide. That kind of consistency had to count for something, right? For a long time, I believed it did. Amanda and I had a routine, stable, predictable, maybe even boring by some people's standards, but it felt like home to me. I figured loyalty was the cement that held it all together. Even when things got hard, I believed that as long as I stayed present, steadfast, everything else would fall into place. I wasn't the flashy guy. I wasn't the spontaneous, show up with flowers at lunch kind of husband. But I was there. Always. When her mom had surgery, I was there. When her job demanded long hours, I picked up the slack without complaint. I never asked for much, just some honesty, some trust. That seemed like a fair deal. Amanda used to say I was her rock, the one thing in her life she could count on. I wore that like a badge of honor. I didn't realize how easy it is to be blind when you're busy being proud. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I had come home early from work because my meeting got canceled and I figured I'd surprise Amanda by making dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and that garlic bread she liked. I needed a charger and remembered she usually kept a spare in her work tote. That bag was usually off limits, not because she told me so, but because it was her space. A boundary. But we were married, right? Married people don't need to tiptoe around each other. I reached in and pulled out a tangled mess of receipts, gum wrappers, and half a protein bar. Then I saw it, thicker paper, folded neatly. My name wasn't on it, but it pulled my attention like gravity. Belvedere Grand Hotel. 2-night stay. Corner suite. Ocean view. Date, 2 days ago. Guest, Ben Ashcroft. I read it twice, then a third time. My stomach didn't sink, it folded. Ben Ashcroft? I didn't know a Ben Ashcroft. I didn't even know Amanda knew a Ben Ashcroft. It wasn't the kind of hotel her firm used for conferences either. Too upscale, too an asterisk, mate. I stared at the receipt like it would offer an explanation if I just looked hard enough. When Amanda got home later that evening, she seemed bright. Lighter than usual. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her bag on the counter like always and said, "I'm starving." Tie? Like nothing was off. Like there wasn't a live grenade tucked inside her purse 20 minutes ago. I kept it casual. I asked her, "Hey, I was looking for your charger and found this." I handed her the receipt, watching her closely. She took one glance and chuckled like I'd handed her an old birthday card. "Oh, that must have been from last week's conference," she said, tossing it into the trash without hesitation. I was helping Mel sort out the reservation packets and I must have grabbed one by mistake. Mel was her assistant. Young, newly hired, and slightly terrified of her. The idea that Amanda, who labeled her folders down to the color code, would accidentally take home a personal hotel receipt didn't sit right with me. But she smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I wanted pad thai or green curry. That's when I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. Amanda could lie. Not just the white lie kind of lie, like, "I love that shirt" or "I'm fine." No, she could lie convincingly. Casually. With warmth and a steady voice. She could lie and still remember to ask me if I wanted extra chili sauce. That shook me. I didn't confront her. I nodded, made dinner, and pretended I didn't feel like the ground had just shifted under me. Later that night, she said she was meeting old friends from college. Her voice had that breezy tone, the kind people use when they're hoping you don't ask too many questions. I didn't press. I just said, "Have fun," and watched her drive away in the car I'd helped her pick out last fall. But the silence that followed, that's when things got loud in my head. I sat on the porch with a beer I didn't really want, replaying the last few months in my head like a highlight reel turned upside down. Suddenly, things that seemed like nothing started to pile up. The extra gym sessions she said were for her back pain. The new perfume I didn't recognize. The way she'd started locking her phone. Amanda never used to care about her phone. She'd leave it on the nightstand, screen up, buzzing away with group chats about weddings and office gossip. Now it was always in her back pocket or face down, charging in her office instead of next to her bed. We used to talk every night. About everything, work, politics, even dumb stuff like which grocery store had better avocados. Lately she filtered her words. Chose them too carefully. Like each sentence had to be approved by some internal editor. She'd laugh at my jokes, but it felt delayed, like she was remembering how laughter was supposed to sound. There was a chill between us that hadn't always been there. I had told myself we were just busy. That life was just hectic. But I couldn't lie to myself anymore, not after that receipt. That was real. Tangible. A little piece of someone else's story folded up in my kitchen. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I needed time to sit with it, to weigh whether I was paranoid or just finally seeing clearly. It's funny how betrayal doesn't start with screaming matches or slam doors. Sometimes it starts with a printed piece of paper and a polite smile. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, taunting circles. Amanda came home around midnight. I heard her heels in the hallway, the soft click of her makeup bag being set on the bathroom counter. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. She climbed into bed and turned away from me like she'd done a dozen times before. But that night felt different. Not because she was gone, she wasn't. Her body was right there beside mine. But she wasn't with me. Not really. I wanted to reach for her. Ask. Demand. Cry. Something. But I didn't. I just stared at the ceiling until sleep took over like a slow tide. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. Or maybe I did. Maybe some part of me had already started grieving something that wasn't officially lost. Yet, they say hindsight is 20/20ths, but I think that's too generous. Hindsight isn't just clear, it's cruel. It makes you realize how much you missed because you were too busy believing things were fine. That they get better. That people don't just change without telling you. After that night with the hotel receipt, something shifted in me. I didn't say anything to Amanda, but I started watching more closely. Not in the obsessive, snooping way. I wasn't ready for that version of myself yet, but like a man listening for a sound he knows is coming, even if he can't quite name it. The thing about distance is it doesn't always show up with slamming doors or shouting matches. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wearing familiarity like a mask. That's how it started with Amanda. Little things. Small shifts. The kind of changes that are easy to ignore until they're all you can see. She started spending more time at the gym. That wasn't new in itself. She'd always been into fitness, but now it was almost every evening. She said it helped her back. Too much desk time, she'd say, waving it off. But she came home glowing in a way that didn't match sore muscles or elliptical runs. And the perfume. God, the perfume. It was subtle, floral with something heavier underneath, something I'd never smelled on her before. She never wore it around me. I asked about it once, jokingly. New scent. She laughed and said a coworker had given her a sample. Trying something different, she said, brushing past me like it didn't matter. But everything inside me told me it did. She used to talk to me all the time. I don't mean big, deep conversations. I mean the little stuff, the nonsense about her boss's weird lunch orders or a TikTok her assistant showed her. But those stories got fewer and fewer. She'd start a sentence, then stop herself. Or she'd speak in these vague, overly polished lines like she was reading from a script that had been heavily revised. And then there was her phone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Everyone's protective of their phones now, right? But Amanda had always been casual with hers. She left it around the house open, buzzing away. Now it was always on silent. Always face down. She'd take it with her from room to room like it was an extension of her arm. At night, she used to charge it on the nightstand. Now it lived in her home office. She said the brighter screen was keeping her up, but I knew better. I just didn't have the guts to say it out loud. The real turning point came at the corporate gala. Amanda's firm was partnering with ours for a joint sustainability initiative, and I'd volunteered to help plan the sponsorship side of the event. We worked side by side on it for weeks, shared files, brainstormed themes, argued over whether the invitations should be embossed. It was the most time we'd spent together in months. And for a moment, I thought maybe it would help us reconnect. It didn't. That night, she looked incredible. Red dress, simple heels, hair curled just enough to look accidental. I couldn't take my eyes off her, even though part of me knew I wasn't the only one looking. She drank more than usual. Not sloppy, just loose. Free. And maybe that's what made the comment hit harder. We were standing with some board members and vendors, and someone made a joke about how Amanda always ran circles around everyone else. She laughed and said, well, Mark's lucky he can keep up. Then she winked and took a sip of champagne. Everyone chuckled. But I didn't. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, like I was a tag-along in my own marriage. Like I was barely holding on. And the way they laughed like they believed it. I excused myself to the bar after that. I needed air or distance, or maybe just not to be standing there feeling like I was the punchline. And that's when I saw it. She was across the room talking to a man I didn't recognize. Tall, confident, just close enough to violate personal space without making it obvious. He leaned in as he spoke. She touched his wrist lightly, deliberately. Not a handshake. Not a greeting. It was the kind of touch that says, I know you. I'd seen her do it before, years ago when we were first dating and still obsessed with each other. That soft, familiar graze. I watched her laugh, tilt her head. She looked happy. At ease. More so than I'd seen her in a long time. That was the moment I knew. She had already chosen. She wasn't deciding between me and someone else. That decision had been made long before the receipt, the perfume, or the new gym leggings. I just hadn't caught up yet. I left the gala early. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't even tell her I was going. I just walked out, got in my car, and sat there with the engine off, staring at the dashboard like it held answers. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel much of anything at all, to be honest. Just this numbness that settled into my chest and stayed there like it had paid rent. That week, I stopped asking questions. If she said she had meetings, I nodded. If she said she was working late, I said okay. I started responding with less than I felt, which wasn't hard since I didn't feel much anymore. I kept a journal for the first time in years. Not one of those poetic, self-discovery things. Just dates, observations, times she left, times she came back. I told myself it wasn't spying, it was recording. Documenting. Building a timeline I hoped I'd never need but suspected I would. It's strange how quickly you can become a stranger in your own life. The woman I used to share everything with now walked past me like we were roommates at best, ghosts at worst. She still said love you when she left for work, but her eyes never matched the words. I stopped saying it back. Not to punish her, but because it felt dishonest. We went on like that for a while, polite distance, scheduled silences, careful choreography. From the outside, I'm sure we still looked fine. Two busy professionals just trying to make it work. But inside, the walls were rotting. I could smell the mold even if she still sprayed Febreze. And yet, I didn't leave. Because part of me still hoped I was wrong. That it was a phase, or burnout, or something fixable. But deep down I knew. You don't touch someone's wrist like that unless you've already let them in. It's funny how betrayal doesn't always feel like a stab. Sometimes it's more like erosion. A slow, steady wearing away of the ground beneath your feet until one day you realize there's nothing left to stand on. And still, I stood there, pretending not to notice the cracks. A week after the gala, I found proof. Not suspicions, not guesswork, undeniable, unfiltered, full-color proof. The kind of proof that doesn't just end a chapter, but rips the whole book off the shelf and sets it on fire. It happened on a Sunday morning. Amanda had gone to meet her mom for brunch, or so she said. I stayed behind, telling her I needed to prep for a client presentation. That part was true. What wasn't true was that I intended to get any work done. I was in her office to grab a charger cable, another one of those little things she always borrowed and never returned. Her backup laptop sat on the desk, open, the screen still lit. She must have walked away without closing it. It was habit, I guess. I reached for the lid to shut it. Then I saw the inbox. It wasn't her work email. It wasn't her personal Gmail either. It was an account I'd never seen before. One of those Proton Mail addresses. Private, encrypted. Secure. The kind people use when they want to make damn sure nobody's watching. And for a few seconds I stood there staring at it, my hand hovering over the mouse, debating whether or not to look. But here's the truth, I had already lost something. I just didn't know how deep the cut went. I clicked. The subject lines read like a confession in list form. Belmont weekend itinerary. Next Friday, same room? Photos from the lake house. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened the first email. It was a thread. Amanda and a man named Ben Ashcroft. The same name from the hotel receipt. It wasn't just a thank you for a nice dinner. It was a play-by-play of an entire weekend, plans, bookings, check-in instructions, and even Spotify playlists. She had sent him pictures of the suite ahead of time. You'll love the tub, she wrote. I already tested it. I clicked on another message. This one hit harder. It was a series of selfies. Her in white sheets. Her hair messy in that soft, morning-after way I hadn't seen in months. Her glass of wine held up next to his, both grinning, sun pouring in from behind. There were captions like, best escape yet and you always know how to calm my chaos. Every word felt like a punch to the chest, but I kept reading. She told him things she hadn't told me in years. How she hated being called Mrs. Brooks. How the city felt suffocating. How she missed the version of herself she used to be. He responded like a man who thought he was saving her from something. It was clear they weren't just sleeping together. They had something. Something that required planning, coordination, secrecy. A second life built parallel to mine, one where I didn't exist. I checked the timestamps. Their weekend getaway? That was the same weekend Amanda told me she had a client offsite in Tahoe. She'd even asked me to water her plants while she was gone. I did. I texted her pictures to prove I hadn't forgotten. She responded with, thank you, babe. You're the best. Meanwhile, she was lying in a bed with someone else, probably showing him those messages and laughing. I felt sick. But I didn't throw the laptop. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just sat there. For nearly an hour, I stared at the screen. I read every message, every detail. I clicked every attachment like I was collecting evidence for a case I never wanted to prosecute. Part of me needed to know how long it had been going on. But another part, some darker, colder part, wanted the full scope of betrayal, as if knowing the details would give me control. It didn't. It just gave me clarity. Amanda hadn't just crossed a line. She'd set up camp on the other side of it. Decorated it. Made it cozy. And worst of all, she was good at it. Smooth. Efficient. Experienced. I closed the laptop gently like you would after finishing a book you hated but couldn't put down. I stood up and looked around the office, her books, her awards, the framed picture of us from that winery trip last fall. The fake smile on her face suddenly made sense. It was all a prop. A set piece for a version of our life that only existed for public display. I thought about confronting her right then. I imagined slamming the laptop onto the dining table, demanding answers, forcing her to choose. But I already knew her answer. She'd chosen months ago. Maybe longer. And in that moment, confrontation felt too easy. Too reactive. Amanda had built something behind my back. But she built it on top of mine, on top of the trust one gave her, the life I supported. And I wasn't going to scream and beg and collapse like the wounded husband in some courtroom drama. I was going to dismantle what she thought was unshakable. Quietly. Precisely. Piece by piece. Not out of revenge. Out of necessity. Because once you've seen the truth unfiltered, undeniable, complete, you stop playing defense. And you start rewriting the script. I didn't say a word to Amanda that night. She came home around 6:45, chipper in that distant way that used to fool me. She kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted to try that new Vietnamese place that opened near the park. I said sure. I even smiled. You'd never know I had read every message she'd sent to Ben that morning, had seen photos of her in a hotel bed while I was washing her sheets back home. She talked over dinner about how the firm was onboarding a new analytics team and how everyone was already exhausted by the corporate jargon. I nodded, asked the right questions, even laughed once. But inside, I was gone, watching her like someone watching a stranger do a perfect impression of his wife. And that was the key difference now. I wasn't trying to fix us anymore. I was studying her. She thought she was 2 steps ahead. That's what made it easy. Amanda believed in control. Not chaos, not spontaneity. Her power came from plans, backup plans, alternative scenarios, margin for error spreadsheets. Everything in her life had structure. She was raised that way, taught to win through order, not force. So when she started cheating, she didn't get messy. She got methodical. And that was her blind spot. Because while she was busy engineering an exit strategy, I was quietly reminding myself who had built the floor she stood on. Amanda's father, Charles Hastings, was a legend in our city's business circles. He co-founded Hastings Consulting Group with a sharp mind and sharper connections. When Amanda and I got married, I had just started Brooks Tech, small data systems, lean team, working out of a rented space above a hardware store. When Charles found out, he invited me to lunch and told me, if you can prove you're useful, I'll help you scale. That's how the merger happened. Hastings Group didn't want to build proprietary software, they wanted to buy someone who already had it. And I had Elara Systems, a small company I acquired 2 years in. Amanda had once dismissed it as a clunky platform with no interface, but I saw what it could do. Elara had the infrastructure to power enterprise-grade analytics through simple modular add-ons. What it didn't have was capital. Enter me. Enter Hastings Group. After months of legal headaches, we signed the deal. Hastings Group absorbed Elara's IP, but I kept a critical clause buried in the paperwork, one that Amanda never cared enough to look for. The clause gave me veto rights over any licensing updates to Elara's backend framework, even after integration. Without my signature, the system couldn't be altered, repackaged, or transferred. The entire tech framework they used to run client dashboards was essentially leased, like a car with a K*LL switch hidden behind the glove box. And I held the key. For months after Amanda pushed me out quietly with a boardroom vote she orchestrated behind my back, I kept my distance. No drama, no retaliation. Just silence. I knew it confused her. I knew she expected fireworks. Instead, I got quiet. And then I moved. That weekend I drafted a clean, simple memo. Not from a lawyer. Not from me directly. Just an official notice to Hastings Group's client portfolio explaining a temporary freeze on system updates connected to Elara's legacy modules. The reason? Licensing audits. Technically true. Legally sound. No drama. But the ripple started Monday morning. Emails flooded in from vendor partners. Calls from project managers. Update requests flagged. Automated processes stalled mid-run. Amanda's firm had gotten comfortable leaning on Alara's core tech, but without access to those modules, their reporting features broke. Real-time dashboards blinked out. API calls returned dead data. And suddenly, the floor Amanda stood on wasn't so solid. She didn't connect it to me right away. Of course not. I was the loyal ex-partner. The one she replaced. The one she outmaneuvered. She probably assumed it was a glitch. Maybe a back-end issue. Maybe a systems vendor mistake. Until she saw the freeze notice. And the name at the bottom of the clause. Mine. That week, I got a call from Charles. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Not since Amanda made sure I was transitioned out during a quarterly board refresh. But this time, his voice wasn't warm. It was tired. Concerned. Mark, he said, skipping pleasantries, we need to talk. So we did. I met him in his private office, top floor, same framed golf photo on the wall from some country club he once dragged me to. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. Worn down. Like a man who just realized the machine he built had started spinning without him. He didn't mention Amanda by name at first. Just said the board had been agitated, that performance issues were being reviewed. Then he looked me in the eye and asked, "What do you want?" And I told him. Not revenge. Not even an apology. Just the chance to put the system back in place properly. With oversight. With clear terms. With people who actually understood the tech they were selling. And for that, I needed operational control. His silence told me everything. He knew Amanda's ambitions had cost the firm more than he realized. By Thursday, the board had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, at least not officially. But Charles made sure my name was on the docket. I sat at the far end of the conference table, flanked by people who had once dismissed me as Amanda's tech guy. Now they watched me like I was the one pulling the emergency brake, and in a way I was. Charles delivered the news himself. Amanda would step down from the board. Effective immediately. She'd retain an executive role, but under direct supervision. I would be reinstated. Full operational oversight. Project veto rights. Control over all future tech partnerships. Amanda sat across from me as the terms were read aloud. Her expression never changed. No shock. No outrage. Just that practiced calm, the same one she used when she told me the hotel receipt was nothing. But this time she didn't laugh. She didn't speak. She just listened. Because she knew. She knew the moment I walked in that room that it was already over. Not because I yelled louder, but because I had waited. Calculated. Moved when it mattered. The same way she had. Only difference? I hadn't lied to get here. Amanda didn't fight it. She didn't argue, didn't plead her case, didn't even ask for a closed-door conversation after the board meeting ended. She just stood up, adjusted the cuff of her blazer, and walked out like it was any other Thursday. I stayed behind, shaking hands with people who had once avoided eye contact when I walked into a room. Now they nodded like I was a returning general. I didn't care much for the symbolism. What mattered to me wasn't pride, it was the system. The one Amanda had been quietly bending until it cracked. When I stepped back into the firm, I didn't make an announcement. No grand entrances. No motivational speeches. I showed up the next morning before the sun rose, walked through the front doors with a coffee in hand, and went straight to the operations floor. The same one Amanda used to joke I was too hands-on with. The first order of business? Eliminate the shadows. Amanda had spent the last year building out a protective bubble. People who were loyal to her, not because of merit, but because she'd positioned them in places they didn't belong. Charles had warned her once that nepotism was like rust, it doesn't show until the structure buckles. But she didn't listen. Now, the buckling had beg asterisk n. I started with department heads. Every single one would be reviewed, not just for results, but for relevance. Did their teams function? Did their roles still matter? Or were they just echo chambers feeding Amanda reports she wanted to hear? I brought in outside consultants to run an objective audit. I didn't want to play favorites. I wanted a system that could outlive personalities. The audit results came back quietly damning. 3 of Amanda's closest allies were reclassified. One had padded performance metrics for 2 quarters. Another had been redirecting project credit to Amanda's dashboard. The third simply didn't do anything except attend meetings and summarize what others had already decided. They were all reassigned or let go. No spectacle. Just emails. Clean and immediate. Amanda still had her executive role, of course. I didn't strip her title. That would have been personal. I wanted the message to be louder than that. She would now report to the very system she once tried to sidestep. I gave her a new directive, integration compliance. Her job was to ensure Alara's modules, now restructured and renamed, could be implemented across departments without conflict. Not strategy. Not vision. Compliance. She followed the protocol. Never challenged a memo. Never skipped a status meeting. To the outside world, she was still in leadership. Internally, she'd become what she feared most, a piece of the machinery, not the operator. The tension between us faded not because we healed, but because we stopped pretending. We were no longer partners. Not in marriage. Not in business. We were two professionals bound by consequence. And that, in a twisted way, made things easier. She no longer lied. I no longer hoped. With Amanda's influence curtailed, I turned to what really mattered, rebuilding the company's identity. Hastings Group had always thrived on legacy. The name opened doors, earned trust, carried weight. But lately, it had also become a shield used to excuse bad hires, slow decisions, and bloated budgets. It needed a reboot. A realignment. So I met with Charles again. One-on-one. This time he looked different. Not broken, but humbled. I think seeing his daughter unravel the very firm he built shook something in him. Made him realize that family, for all its warmth, isn't immune to entropy. We talked numbers. We talked structure. We talked about what kind of business we wanted to leave behind. Then he surprised me. I'm retiring next quarter, he said. It caught me off guard. Why? I asked. He didn't blink. Because I trust you to build something better. Something I couldn't. There was a long silence between us. Then he reached into his briefcase and handed me a proposal. It was already drafted. Already signed. Effective immediately, the company would operate under a new name, Hastings and Brooks. I stared at the letterhead. My name etched next to his in matching font. Not as a footnote. As a partner. I didn't ask for this, I said quietly. I know, he replied. That's why you're the right one to carry it. For a man like Charles Hastings, that was the closest thing to a blessing. By the time the announcement went out to staff, the ripple had already *N. People stood a little taller. Meetings had fewer buzzwords and more substance. The message was clear, legacy was no longer the centerpiece. Performance was. Amanda didn't speak when the name change was announced. She sat in the back corner of the all-hands meeting, arms crossed, face unreadable. Maybe she expected this. Maybe she didn't. But she didn't protest. I noticed something else that day, though, something quieter. People didn't look to her anymore. She used to command the room. With her posture, her tone, her surgically chosen words. But now they looked to me. Not because I was louder, but because I had stayed when things broke. I had kept the engine running. And now I was rebuilding the road. That shift, subtle but seismic, was the real power change. Not the titles. Not the contracts. The trust. Amanda had once told me that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad leadership. Now I understood what she meant. Because I watched half a dozen people she once protected quietly resign over the next few weeks, not out of fear, but because their shelter was gone. And I didn't chase them. The company didn't need shadows anymore. It needed sunlight. So we opened the blinds. One by one, we dismantled the old hierarchies. Promotions were reviewed. Compensation was rebalanced. We introduced a transparency dashboard that showed internal metrics to the entire staff. No more mystery. No more whispers. The firm became what I always believed it could be, a place where outcomes mattered more than optics. And Amanda? She did her job. No more, no less. We passed each other in hallways like coworkers who'd never been anything else. The ring was long gone. The memories, too, were beginning to dull like old Polaroids left in the sun. But I didn't hate her. I just didn't know her anymore. And maybe that was the final evolution, not rage or grief, but detachment. She had built her world by stepping over mine. Now she had to watch me build mine without her in it. With Amanda out of the boardroom and Charles officially stepping back, I finally had the freedom to rebuild the firm, not just fix it, but reimagine it from the ground up. The first thing I did was dismantle the protective layer Amanda had crafted around herself. Her inner circle, once insulated by favors and proximity, was no longer safe by default. Every director, every manager, every legacy hire faced a performance audit. Some passed. Some didn't. I made it clear, this wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Alara Systems, now rebranded under a new platform name, became the backbone of our internal infrastructure. We didn't just reintegrate it, we rebuilt it with transparency at the core. New compliance protocols were implemented. Every major decision required shared oversight. No more backdoor moves. No more secrets. You could feel the shift in the office. Conversations got sharper. People stopped watching their backs and started watching the numbers. Those who thrived under meritocracy rose quickly. Those who coasted began to disappear, quietly and without drama. Amanda kept her new role. She showed up. She delivered. But she didn't speak out of turn anymore. She followed protocol down to the letter. There were no more late-night strategy calls, no whispered deals. If she wanted something approved, she sent it through the proper channels, just like anyone else. She had become part of the system she once tried to manipulate. Irony has a way of straightening things out. 3 months later, the firm posted its highest Q2 growth in 4 years. Client retention was up. Employee churn was down. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was holding something broken together with duct tape and hope. Charles invited me to lunch on a Friday. We didn't talk about Amanda. Not directly. Just business, legacy, and what it meant to build something that could outlive you. He raised his glass and said, "It's yours now. Don't let it rot." Back at the office, Amanda and I passed each other by the elevators. No glances. No tension. Just two people walking separate paths in the same building. I didn't need an apology. I already had the truth, and the truth was enough. Her cousin Dana had resigned weeks earlier. A new logo had just been unveiled. The building now read, Hastings and Brooks in brass letters beneath the glass awning. I never asked for the name. Charles had it engraved himself. I stood there for a long moment, watching the sun reflect off the metal. They thought they buried me when they forced me out, when they chose legacy over loyalty. But they didn't bury me. They buried the old structure. And I was the one still standing, not because I yelled louder, but because I knew how to stay still long enough for the dust to settle and strike only where it mattered most.